Mike Hall, who is chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and a lot on his shoulders as West Virginia tries to sort through these budget issues. Mike, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning. At least that ball game took my mind off the budget for a while.
Well, it did. It was, but there were similarities to the budget. I mean, there was a collapse in the budget. There was a collapse in the game. It was, anyway.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks for coming on today. Okay, so as chairman of the Finance Committee, and yesterday I talked to Chairman Nelson of the House Finance Committee, and he says that within 2 weeks, he expects to have a document ready to a counterproposal to what the governor has put forward of $450 million in tax increases and about $28 million in cuts. Is that the route you're going as well, or do you have a different plan for a budget alternative?
Well, we were discussing that this morning with several of our members of our Republican caucus as I was going over the budget details. We've actually begun to look at elements of the justice budget and the kinds of things that, say, Earl Ray Tomlin did a year ago to try to, put together a plan looking at what to bring forward. Because I'm operating off of this very simple thing. We've been given a revenue estimate, $4.055 billion and change. And somehow we have to have a balanced budget that does not spend more money than that or adds money to that allows us to spend, and that's what we're operating off. I'm not talking about tax increases.
I understand.
In addition, you've got little tricks in the law where we can add 50 to 100 million, bringing money from here or there. And so, we've looked at the budget and we found some things that we have some questions about. But yes, we're working on that. In 2 weeks, I could hand you. By the end of this week, I could just, slash and burn and give you a document. But our caucus is taking the approach that we kind of want to process the idea, make sure the implications of everything that happens in a document like that, and people know what they're voting on. And some of our members expressed appreciation for that, particularly our new ones, because this budget potentially has some significant changes from previous expenditure budgets that have some effect, either positive or negative. And so people need to process that. We need to go through our hearings. And so that's the normal process, and we're staying on that track.
Mm-hmm.
But we appreciate, they're to do the budget first. If they want to do it in 2 weeks, I think, from our side, they may be more skilled at speed perhaps, but we've looked, this is, as I said to my caucus, this is like a crossword puzzle. You throw 1,000 piece puzzle on the desk and say, I want to try to solve this in an hour. Well, when you get to an hour, maybe you're not as far along as you thought.
And I want to go there. And I want to go there because I want folks to understand why it gets complicated. Because it's not just that there's this document and you just can, start cutting here and there, because so much of the spending is in law. And the law says that, if you have this money, it has to go there, and this has to go there, and this has to go there. Point being that if you want to make significant changes in spending, you have to make significant changes in law, which means individual bills. And so is that what you're working on too, is trying to coordinate that?
Well, absolutely. As a part of our budget scenario, we were looking at things that would require legislation to be passed. For example, not just to pick one out of the air, the governor proposed, he put no funding in his budget for the REISs, all right?
Right.
Which is a small amount of money, all right? Well, that takes some restructuring of several activities inside the REISs, and it will take some legislation because they're in code, so that in order to if you just cut the number and say, all right, these REIS offices no longer have this money, well, they still do things. They still raise money. They do training for firemen and all this stuff, so that you'll have to transition those activities. And I'm not saying he's right or wrong in that, but you're correct. That will take the Education Committee's meeting to determine. Also, there's some discussion in this House of Delegates, for example, of eliminating the education in the arts as it currently is, the old supersecretary concept being eliminated there, and those activities being rolled somewhere. And so in order to do that, those things are funded in the budget, so you have to wait.
Right,
I mean,
right,
I would
right.
assume that.
Let me ask you. Let me ask
Yeah.
a philosophical question. Mike Hall is with us, who's chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. So, as you pointed out, the projection for the amount of money that the state would collect, barring any tax increases for next fiscal year, would be about $4.5 billion. So, if you start there,
No, 4.05 billion.
Okay, so
$4.55 billion.
Okay, $4 billion. So,
Yeah.
do you proceed with the assumption that the budget should reflect that the budget should be, okay, we're only going to spend $4 billion because we're only going to collect $4 billion, or because the governor is projecting again $450 million in tax increases to fund pay increases, other stuff he wants to do, that kind of thing?
Well, the only way I can answer that, and I've tried to find a good way to answer that question, but I just say this. I've said, 117 people were elected last November to be here to work on this decision. Mm-hmm. I've listened to a lot of them. I've listened to the conversations, and and based on the experience I had last year, and at this point, I do not see. They're saying to me and to the state, because the public, they're elected officials, that no new right now. It's no new revenue measures. Their response on the part of the legislative leadership, it appears, and the caucuses, is to not go along with those. So, we're today 6 or 7, 5 or 6 here. I will have to then, and that's what I've told my caucus and will tell the entire Senate and the Finance Committee, we have to build a budget based upon the revenue we've got. I mean, you can't spend if you want to go to the expensive restaurant, but you've only got enough money to go to McDonald's, you might have to go to McDonald's.
If you go that, Mike,
that's what I'm working on.
Yeah, so if you go that route, Mike, and again, I'm going to have a representative on today who is objecting to Governor Justice's proposed cut of $300,000 or $400,000 from the film office. So, I mean, which is not a big amount when you talk about fixing the budget. So, if the Republicans do want to stick with the $4 billion in revenues and not have any additional revenue, and then there will have to be subsequent cuts, are the Republicans, are you and others ready for the hue and cry that will come from all those who are going to descend on the Capitol and say, oh, my God, starving children, starving seniors, starving film industry people, starving reporters, everything else?
Yeah, I've been here a long time, and you know that. And I don't relish that possibility or reality, but I know it's real, and I think there comes a point to where the people that have to make these decisions have to face the implication of them, and the implications are not, as those people walk through the door, and most of them make what I call the return on investment argument.
Right.
They say, if you don't spend this money, then you're going to lose. I read the article about the film thing Sunday. Thought it was well done. Think I know what he's going to say. Tend to agree with what he's saying. But the hard reality of the Constitution, the way it's constructed, and the tyranny of the urgent is that a budget document has to be constructed within the revenue streams that I've got handed to me in the Finance Committee, in the Senate, and the legislature that we have now. And if for some reason those don't improve, then, as we get toward the end, as people may change their mind or say, well, we need to do something here or there to bring more revenue in, maybe it'll change. But right now, the way I read the tea leaves, I'm working on, and I've presented to the caucus already, several numbers of reduction. Not, I will say this very quickly. The alternative budget document, the $450 million one that was put out there saying if you don't do this, you got to do this, that's not quite true. There are other things that we can.
All right, let me stop you there and make sure people understand, because the governor's office did say, well, if you don't do our budget, then here's what $450 million in cuts looked like. And it was closing colleges. It was getting rid of promised scholarship. But clearly there's a middle ground. Clearly there is another one.
There absolutely is a middle ground, but and that middle ground can get you, as we're looking at it now, you could get within doing some things that are not easy. I'm not saying that these are easy, but they, in my opinion, they're easier than some of the things on that list. You can get to about $250 million in, I wouldn't necessarily call them all cuts, but I would say rollbacks and different revenue things you can do that aren't tax increases that would eat into that 450.
I'll guarantee
number.
I guarantee to get there's no teacher pay raise in there, and I would guarantee to get there's no $105 million for the Save Our State Fund, which the governor proposed. Which, do you know, by the way?
Perceptive.
Well, do you know, by the way,
Yeah,
the governor?
yeah.
We don't know much about that. The governor just said in the State of the State, he said this Save Our State Fund, they're going to $105 million. It's going to be this economic development fund that he wants. We haven't heard much more about. Do you know anything more about that? And what is your?
I thought the governor did a great job in his speech and connected with people. But that particular item, I've had a meeting with the Commerce Secretary couple times, and it never came up in the meeting. He did suggest to me in one meeting that I need about $7 more million to add to the $3 million in my budget to help attract larger businesses here, to which I showed him that the fact that in his office was the money that's used for project money, CPP money, and I said, it's sitting there unencumbered. If you want to grab that, I mean, that would be legislative money. I said, you could grab that, and he didn't know about that when he came into my office, and I said, but nothing was said about the other money. So, yeah, I mean, it leaves. So when you look when you look at an item and see $105 million, and you don't really know, and it's a trust me argument. And then you're cutting out all these other things. I just think that, I said, and I'd say this again. That idea is going to have to be processed a little bit more.
Well, that's a kind way of saying, if I take everything except your last sentence, is when we got to look at cutting a lot of things, when there's not a lot of, if any, sentiment in the majority for raising taxes, I can't give you $100 million.
Yeah,
can't do it.
I mean, he argued, and I'm willing to listen.
Sure.
I think if he says, look, if I have this money, the return on investment for this money is X amount of dollars in the next few years. But here's the problem, that this budget process is constitutionally constructed to say that the legislature has to pass a balanced budget based on the revenue estimates. If you take $100 million from those revenue estimates and just put it in the general revenue budget document, you're making this task hard to do. Government budgeting is not really like individual budgeting. This is where we get into this thing. Why don't they just pass a budget? Well, the fact is we're operating under certain constraints that a normal budgeting process does not. And when you do that and take $100 million, and maybe you should put it in the general revenue obligation and say, oh, by the way, here's all the money you got, unless you raise taxes or whatever, then it's problematic.
I understand. I get it. I mean, it is. It's complicated and it's very difficult. I would just ask this, Mike, and I know you're neck deep in this thing. Just let's try to get it done without, a special session. I mean, we got.
Well, do I have 10 seconds to comment on that?
Yes, sir.
I believe the Constitution is clear and that we violated it last year. I believe the Constitution directs the legislature to pass a budget bill in the regular session or the extended regular session. And I will challenge, or try to, if that comes up again. Last year, however you could say it, the pressure of getting out of town or whatever. But I think I've had people look at this and say, Mike, you're right. So that the budget bill is the only one in the Constitution that we're required to pass. And so that's the one we need to work on and get finished in the 60 days. And the Constitution provides for an extended session for however long, in the judgment of the governor, it says, it takes to get it done.
Well,
that's what we need to do it. We don't need a special session. We need to get it done.
In that case, I'll let you get back to work. Senator Mike Hall, Chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
All right, later.